Watching News at Prime, let's pick up on this discussion now. AfriForum is going after the ANC Secretary General, Fikile Mbalula, in a private prosecution. This is over Mbalula's 2016 Dubai family holiday trip. Now, the organization says it is now in possession of the docket from the National Prosecuting Authority. A couple of months ago, the National Prosecuting Authority decided not to charge Mbalula in connection with the trip. To tell us more about this decision to pursue private prosecution, we're joined now by Bateman. He is with AfriForum. Barry, good evening to you and thank you for your time. Let's take the viewers back to 2016. This was the time when Fikile Mbalula took his family on holiday to Dubai. His official title at that time was that of a minister. What was wrong with him taking his family on a holiday?
Good evening, Goli. Let's clarify, he wasn't just a minister, he was the sports minister.
Yeah.
And the holiday that he went on to Dubai was, it emerged later, that it was paid for by a company, or partly paid for, let's be clear on that as well, partly paid for a company called Sedgars Sport. At the time, Sedgars was a supplier to Sascoc and had been doing so since about 2013. We've also learned that there were other individuals who had paid for this trip. Fikile Mbalula claimed at the time, and he told the public protector in the investigation report that was released in 2018, that the money that he got from Sedgars was merely a loan. He was old friends that he had taken this money to pay for it. Unfortunately for the minister, in terms of the applicable corruption legislation, even a mere loan from somebody can be classified as a gratification. So that is why it's a problem that Fikile Mbalula went on a holiday with his family. It's because it was funded by other people other than himself.
Now, on Friday, I would assume this is this past Friday, you went to the headquarters of the South African Police Service to pick up this docket using the Promotion of Access to Information Act. And upon retrieving this docket, Barry, the private prosecuting unit of AfriForum says it's convinced that Mbalula has a case to answer to. What have you seen?
We were already quite confident that Fikile Mbalula had a case to answer to, based purely on what the public protector had found. On Fikile Mbalula's own version, he took a loan from somebody who was a supplier or who is the director of a company who's a supplier to Sascoc. What obtaining a copy of the docket has just more further confirmed this case, because there are financial investigation reports that have been conducted that show the movement of money to Fikile Mbalula. It also shows a timeline. That's a very important aspect, Goli. The holiday was booked in December 2016. Late that month, Fikile Mbalula left the country with his family and went on holiday. He hadn't paid a cent towards the travel agency for that. Only when the travel agency started asking for money for him to pay for the trip did he then start asking around for the funds to settle this debt. And it was only in March that the first funds, or late February into March, that the first funds were actually paid to Munlin Travel. That debt was settled then with the travel agency. He only paid back Sedgars' director later that year, when I, as a journalist for Eyewitness News at the time, came asking Fikile Mbalula about this particular holiday. It was only then that he settled the so-called debt. So all of this is captured in the docket. I just referred to those financial investigations. There are other people. This is also important that we've discovered in the docket. There are at least 4 other people who should be in the dock next to Fikile Mbalula. We're talking about former heads of sporting code federations in the country, significantly influential business people who are his benefactors, people who moved cash around for Fikile Mbalula, according to their own versions, picked up cash from him and went and deposited it into other bank accounts in order to settle this debt he had with the travel agency. So getting the docket has been very helpful in not exposing or showing us that there are more avenues to this alleged offense, but confirming that indeed the Secretary General of the ANC does have a case to answer to.
Let's get to the interesting part, therefore, the private prosecution element, because what you are saying now is that you believe, as AfriForum Private Prosecution Unit, that it was irrational not to prosecute Mr. Mbalula. Let's answer that question, and perhaps in tandem, now that you say he did eventually settle the loan, would a court still find him guilty of wrongdoing?
Well, let me answer that first, the second question rather, on the fact that he settled the loan. That's not what the law says, and specifically that's not what the authority or what the courts have found in regard to corruption. And it's the Jackie Salibi case that established this. And all that needs to happen for corruption to take place is for a dynamic to be created. So in the case of a sports minister who is getting money from a company that is doing business with a federation within the sports department, the mere fact that there was this loan, because a loan constitutes a gratification, creates a dynamic where the one individual would be indebted to the other.
Yeah.
The person accepting the loan doesn't need to do anything. He doesn't need to quid pro quo. There doesn't need to be that. The mere fact that you accept this loan creates and completes the corruption. That's why we say the state or the NPA was irrational when it made the decision not to proceed with the prosecution. Because even on Fikile Mbalula's own version, that he accepted a loan or got into a loan agreement with a company that does business with SASCOC, meets the requirements. So it's on that basis we believe that he has a strong case to answer to. The docket has just shown that there's far more evidence to support this allegation.
Yeah. And the other interesting part here, Barry, is that you are saying this case is perhaps one of those clearest cases of selective prosecution, purely on the basis that this person is a politically connected individual with benefactors. Here's a question I want to ask you based on this statement that you make. I'm reminded of Julius Malema many years ago when he was leader of the Youth League in the ANC, and he, at the time, the media was on his case because of the kind of lifestyle he was leading, including the fancy watches that he would don at the time. And he said, well, I live on donations. Would this be acceptable if Mbalula argued same?
Well, no, it wouldn't be acceptable, because you've got to understand who were the people making the donations, and you've got to understand the way the courts have decided on issues of corruption. Again, we've got to look at who's at play here. We've got the sports minister who, use the term that you use, he accepted a donation from somebody who does business with the SASCOC. You've got to ask, well, why? Why would that person, you have to question, why would that person be giving a donation to that particular individual? And you led to the irresistible inference that there is an expectation of something coming in return. You're creating a dynamic that creates or meets the requirements for the elements of corruption. So the allegation is strongly based on the evidence and even the version that is provided by Fikile Mbalula. So it's not difficult. Any prosecutor, well, this is what we say, any prosecutor who adequately and applies his mind in a fair manner to the facts that we've seen in the docket would come to the conclusion that Fikile Mbalula should be charged.
Yeah. How big a role does AfriForum believe law enforcement, and when I say law enforcement, the police who are supposed to investigate this, the NPA officials who resorted to not prosecuting, how big a role do you believe they've had to play, and are they among those who should answer for why Mr. Mbalula has not been prosecuted, if indeed your private prosecution does proceed?
They absolutely should answer. Let me clarify one aspect first. We've still got a few stages in the process to go through. We need to clarify some aspects related to the record that we've been handed. There are some aspects that are still that are outstanding. So while we have the majority of it, there are some aspects we will get, and only once we have that will we be able to take the next step. But onto your question about whether the SAPS or the NPA would be, if they need to answer. We start at the bottom level, the investigation. It is quite remarkable that people with the level of competence of the investigating officer in this matter are considered experts in crime-fighting units such as the Hawks. The statements, the affidavits that were taken, we're talking about people who are suspected of having committed offenses, yet they are emailed questions from an investigating officer and asked to answer them. There's no scrutiny thereafter of the information that is provided to the investigating officer. Some of the affidavits are barely legible. Fortunately, a lot of the information that's in the docket is objective evidence, such as bank statements. There are reports, FIC reports and the like, into the various movements of money and the withdrawal of cash and deposits and the like. So there is a lot of reliance on there, but the manner in which affidavits were taken is quite shocking. Then we get to the next level where a docket was put before a prosecutor and asked to make a decision. If you just look at the objective facts, how the NPA or a prosecutor reached that decision, you can only infer that there was a selective prosecution at play, because any other individual, it must follow that presented with those facts of the way money was accepted, the way money was moved between accounts and ultimately moved from benefactors of Fikile Mbalula to settle a debt at the travel agency, you must reach the conclusion that somebody has a case to answer to.
Well, based on that response, Barry, it is clear, therefore, that AfriForum believes that Mr. Mbalula is sheltered from prosecution in part because he's a politically connected individual. He may come out and say, why now? Why are you mounting this case now? It is a politically sensitive time, you may want to argue. Elections are upon us. How would you answer the question as to why now?
Well, Fikile Mbalula should perhaps go and ask the NPA why now. And it's important, again, to look at the timeline. The story that I produced was in 2017. 2018, we had the public protector's recommendations. She recommended that the matter be referred to the NPA for further investigation on charges of fraud and money laundering. That didn't happen. The NPA disregarded it. It was then that Monique Tauter from AfriForum in 2019, August 2019, filed the criminal complaint. For 4 years, our office followed up with between the Hawks and the NPA on what was happening with that investigation until last year, May. We threatened the Hawks with going to the court and getting a mandamus to force them to do something in relation to this investigation. It was then in August last year, 4 years later, that the NPA announced its decision not to prosecute Fikile Mbalula. It was then, with that knowledge that they're not going to prosecute, our office then initiated the PIA application. We went through the motions, which included having to appeal several months ago on a decision that was made. It was confirmed last week that we could pick up the docket. That's what we did. We read it and we issued the statement. So the timeline wasn't our doing. The timing was all to do with the flow of events and the manner in which that these processes were underway.
Barry Bateman, thank you very much for your time.